Welcome, Diva family, to episode 12 of the Psychedelic Divas podcast. We have made it to a full dozen episodes, so I am celebrating that very tiny yet mighty milestone. Today's topic is core wounds, and it's just me today, although it's not just my voice represented here. See, core wounds happen to us when we're very young, most likely under the age of 6 or 7. So helping me out here today on the podcast are all my younger selves, those younger voices who experienced and reacted from that early wounding. Before we get started, I just want to say that this is a bit of a vulnerable share today, and I found myself procrastinating pretty much nonstop in putting it together. Parts of me were definitely hesitant to share my personal story here, but ultimately, this is a teaching podcast, and most of what I know comes from my personal psychedelic experience. Ultimately, I believe that the things I have learned can be useful and helpful to others. So I'm pushing through my deep discomfort to share my story and perspective. I hope you find it worthwhile. Let's start with defining our terms. What the heck is a core wound? Well, before we dive in, I need to remind everyone that I've been trained as a life coach, not a therapist. To be clear, this podcast is definitely not meant to provide therapeutic or medical advice in any way, because that is definitely beyond the scope of my capability. The information I'm providing does not come from a background of therapeutic education. It does come from my personal, deep dive exploration of my own experience, looking at my own core wounding. In addition, I've worked with a number of coaching clients to help them identify their wounding as well as the defense mechanisms that were created as a result. It's my personal story combined with many clients' personal stories. Your results will vary. I will also say that doing core wound work is very deep psyche work. It goes to the core of your belief system about yourself. While I do recommend that you consider doing core wound exploration, I absolutely recommend that you do it with the help of a trained therapist, coach, or guide who can hold you through this very intense inner exploration. Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please, go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Thanks. So, what's a core wound? Here's one description of core wound that I found online. Core wounds are negative self-beliefs that shape who we are, how we relate to others, and what we do. Here's another definition. Core wounds are deep psychological wounds that are inflicted upon our psyche by our past experiences, especially early childhood experiences. To a large extent, this is shadow work. It's diving deep into the shadowy parts of ourselves that we don't like or honor and that we've been avoiding. So, why should we explore our core wounds? Why not just leave old memories buried? We do it so we can step into a more empowered, authentic version of ourselves. It's about meeting your emotional pain with compassion so you can understand it better and how it drives you. According to an Instagram meme I saw a while back, we just can't live on purpose when we're driven by survival strategies we developed when we were children. We must heal and transcend our patterns. What does this have to do with psychedelics? Well, for decades now, I've been doing my own core wound work with the assistance of psychedelics, and I thought I would share some of what I've learned over the years in case you find it helpful for your own inner exploration. I believe this work provides a critical insight into how our younger selves created the inner operating systems which currently drive us, mostly on a subconscious level. A large part of those inner operating systems, our beliefs and how we see the world and ourselves, were created when we were very young children who didn't really have a full understanding of what was happening in their world. Certainly, our younger selves didn't have any understanding of the nuances of adult life or why people would make the choices that they did. For example, a child whose parents worked all the time might develop a core wound around not feeling important or loved. And yet, the truth might be that the parents are working so hard because they love the child so much and want to give it a better life than they had. There's so many of us who are operating out of these early childhood misconceptions without understanding that. And then, of course, to protect ourselves from future pain, our younger selves created all kinds of defense mechanisms that are built into this somewhat faulty operating system that was created most likely below the age of 7. I don't know how many children you know under the age of 7, but while all the ones I've met are adorable, I don't think any of them have the wherewithal to create a healthy operating system for a grown-up adult person to live by. And yet, that's pretty much what happened. We are living by the way our younger selves saw the world, by the way their little childlike brains took in and made meaning of things, which may or may not have been correct. So, doing our core wound work is a really good start to the healing and upgrading of our old operating systems. I know that I'm still working on healing my rejection wound. I also know the more work I do, the more distance I'm able to put between a trigger and my response. The more I'm able to take things less personally. And while my defense mechanisms still get triggered, I'm able to calm them down more quickly. And I have more capability for cleaning up any mess those defenses might have created. I first heard the term core wound in 2011 when I was doing a year-long training in energy reading. I had never heard the term before, and the concept intrigued me. How did you figure out what your core wound was? I took that question with me into a psychedelic journey, and I was very clearly shown what my core wound was. When I was 5 and under, we lived on a dead-end cul-de-sac with a number of families and kids. It was common for all the kids to play in the cul-de-sac because it was a relatively safe, car-free zone. I happened to be the youngest of all the kids. My sister was 3 years older, and some of the other kids were older than her. As a result of me being the youngest, they didn't always want to include me. And kids, being kids, they weren't always that thoughtful around the process of getting rid of me. Like the times they played hide and seek and didn't bother to look for me. My sister, being older, wanted to play with the big kids. So she was always telling me to go home or yelling for my mom to take me inside. Now, as an adult, I can understand the dynamics behind this. But my baby girl 4-year-old definitely did not understand. All she felt was rejection. Or in this younger self's words, nobody wants to play with me. And because she didn't understand the nuances of the neighborhood hierarchy, my younger self created a belief structure around that core wound of rejection, which was, what's wrong with me? So there it was. My core wound was nobody wants to play with me, or rejection. And that created the negative belief that there was something wrong with me as a result. Well, I wish I could say uncovering my core wound allowed me to heal it right then, but they don't call it a core wound for nothing. Those negative beliefs, installed by the time I was 5, were an intrinsic part of my psyche, buried deep into my operating system. As a result, for my whole life, I've been primed to look for rejections. My system was on alert for rejection, and it was also always searching for what was wrong with me. As a result, I built a number of defense mechanisms to protect me. Anger was a favorite, but there were others as well. Defense mechanisms are one of the many ways that this early wounding takes control and runs our internal systems. Of course, I didn't know that until I started exploring this concept of core wounding. I had done therapy and coaching, but it wasn't until I did my own deep psychedelic dives where I asked my guides to show me the impact my core wound had on my life and my relationships that I really began to understand how deeply embedded into my system these wounds and defenses were. Once I started understanding the impact it had on me, I began to check in with my clients, helping them to uncover and understand their own core wounding. At first, I wasn't sure whether everyone had a core wound, but it soon became clear that nobody gets out of childhood unscathed. I learned as much from them as I did from my own inner explorations, and I wanted to share a little bit about what I learned with you, as I think it's some of the most important personal growth work we can do. To give you some examples, a core wound belief might look like, I'm not special. I'm not lovable. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm a bad person. I'm an imposter. The world is scary or dangerous or out to get me. I'm not smart. I'm too much for people to handle. I don't belong. I'm an outsider. According to Lissa Rankin, core wounds tend to be things like a sense of not being enough, of being unlovable to a parent, of feeling stupid, dirty, unwanted, or ugly. No matter what your core wound may be, you can guarantee that your wound influences who you are and how you behave. You may heal your wound, yet how it affects you may live on. So how does one go about doing core wound work with psychedelics? Again, I want to reiterate my belief that it's important to work with someone as you do this exploration. I think it's also important to set a safety intention with your guides prior to diving in. It's possible the work is going to stir up feelings, memories, and other issues that might have been shut down or locked away for decades. Asking your guides to agree that they won't leave you adrift at the bottom of the core wound well is a good way to start. Tell your guides that your goal is to dip into the wounding and return with helpful information that you can safely process without getting stuck and mired in the muck. Finally, I don't believe core wound work is the time for large doses. Take it small. Be gentle with yourself, your psyche, and all your younger vulnerable selves. Don't body slam them with a chaotic, heroic dose and then expect them to give up their secrets. You need to provide a safe space for your younger selves to be willing to share their stories. Lots of compassion and self-love are critical components of this work. I think the most important thing to remember is that you're dealing with children, your younger selves who went through these experiences. These younger selves are still frozen in time, in the moments of the wounding. You want to be with them on that open-hearted, childlike level. Don't try to adult them. Don't try and explain away what happened to them. My rejected child doesn't care why the other kids didn't want to play with her. She's not interested in understanding their perspective. All she knows is that nobody wants to play with her, and that hurts. I recommend getting down on the same level as your younger selves so you can look them in the eye and be with them. Be with them in their pain. Acknowledge that whatever happened to them sucked. Tell them that shouldn't have happened to them. Let them know that you are there for them and that they don't have to hold this pain alone anymore. From this place of compassion and meeting your younger self where they are, you can ask your younger selves to describe to you their wounding. Hear it in their words. I don't describe my wound as rejection. I use her words. Nobody wants to play with me. There's no need to fix or change here. Just sit in loving empathy and compassion with them. Let them pour their little wounded hearts out to you in their words. Maybe, for the first time, help them feel held and safe and understood. Someone is finally listening to them, which can have a profound effect on their psyche, which is, of course, your psyche. That can be enough. You can stop there. You've gained a new awareness, and that might be enough for this journey. If you find yourself blown out in any way as a result of going back through these early memories, I do recommend that you stop at this point. There's no need to push. Simply breathe and just be. There's nothing you need to do. Just be with your little ones and let them know that you are there for them. If you want to go a little deeper, you can consider asking your guides some additional questions. You can ask them to show you the impact this core wound has had on your life, especially how it has impacted your relationships. You might want to ask your guides to show you what defense mechanisms your younger selves created as a result of this wounding. Defense mechanisms are what we use to protect ourselves from further wounding. Control patterns that you do to avoid feeling vulnerable or powerless. I mentioned earlier that anger became one of my strongest protective energies. If I felt you rejecting me in any way, that's often how I would respond. Anger made me feel powerful as a child, so it became my favorite defense. I also shut down my vulnerability to protect myself. I wouldn't let you know how I felt or if what you had done had hurt me. Sarcasm, selfishness, arguing, rejection, judgment were all the many ways my younger selves protected themselves from being hurt again. And my guess is that some of you may have some of these defenses, or yours might look very different, such as people-pleasing, avoiding intimacy, overanalyzing situations, passive-aggressiveness, playing the victim. There are so many creative ways that we use defense mechanisms to protect ourselves from emotional pain. You might want to ask your guides, what have been the positive aspects of this wound? So for me, for example, my wound of nobody wants to play with me has the flip side of me being determined to create community around me so that I do have playmates. So you can ask to see the positive aspects of your own core wound. How has this core wound served your soul's growth? If it feels right, you can ask, does this wound still have something to teach me? If the answer is no, you can ask what it would take to heal or release this wound. These are just a few ideas to get you diving a little deeper when you're ready. Remember, you don't want to push. Your younger selves will give up their secrets only when they feel safe and loved. In service of that, when you are done with your core wound explorations, be sure to thank all your younger selves for their help and help them know how invaluable their memories and insights have been. Give them a deep bow of respect for all they've been through. And then do the same for yourself. It's hard work to dig into our wounding. Thank yourself for being willing to uncover these old hurts and wounds. Know that this work is in service of you becoming more whole. So many people in the personal growth world feel that they can just transcend away from their wounding without actually dealing with it. But that's the equivalent of brushing it all under the rug and then trying to ignore that your rug is super lumpy and difficult to walk on. Yes, it's work to clean out everything that got shoved under the rug. Yes, some of it might be really painful to remember. But trying to ignore it just keeps your rug lumpy. To really be awake and to live in your full potential, you have to be willing to deal with the messiness in your life. So thank yourself for your willingness to do the hard work. This is just a taste of the core wound work I've done over the past few decades. If I can help you with yours in any way, please reach out. I think this is some of the most important work we can do in this lifetime. And I use the word work because healing these old patterns is work. Hard work at times because these defenses and hurts and dysfunctional patterns are deep. They're a core part of our belief system, and it's hard to root them out and disable them. Psychedelics have been my best tool in this work, though. They provided the understanding that was necessary for me to, first of all, acknowledge this wound, learn how it has impacted me, and now finally to be releasing and healing these old ways of being. I'd love to say that I'm healed, but that would be a huge lie. In fact, I was recently humbled by how far I had not come on a recent trip back to see my family. It reminded me of the Ram Dass quote, "If you think you are enlightened, go and spend a week with your family." I say that so that you can understand that these core wounds are deep and most likely lifelong teachers. Our job is to be as awake and aware of what our wounds are so that we can ideally be less triggered. But triggering is going to happen. So be sure to cut yourself some slack whenever it does. It's just another growth opportunity. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you found this helpful. My younger selves wish your younger selves ease and joy as you work with them. And remember, my younger selves would be happy to play with yours if you want any help. You can reach me at my coaching website, carladetchen.com. Thank you so much for listening and for being on this growth journey together. If you have a moment, please subscribe, rate, and review Psychedelic Divas on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. Your support helps amplify these important conversations and grow our community. Sending you so much love and appreciation for taking the time to be part of this community. See you next time.